There's just generally a lot of confusion about quantum computing. I think useful to clear it up a little bit. Probably the #1 misconception about quantum computing is that it's faster, quote unquote, than traditional computing. And this is very easily disprovable. Think back to the day you got your first computer. I remember getting my first computer, and it was a 100 megahertz IBM computer, 486. You may have gotten your first computer and it was 2 gigahertz or whatever. Well, a hertz is just a unit per second, and generally cycles per second. Quantum computers operate at around anywhere between 50 to 10,000 hertz. So it would be like 10 kilohertz. So they don't go very fast. So they're in fact much slower than regular computers we have today, which are around anywhere between 2 and 5 gigahertz. And in fact, that's sort of a physical limit due to various properties of physics. You can actually go a lot faster than 5 gigahertz. Just ask Intel. And even the Nvidia GPUs run at a actually slightly slower clock speed, around 2 gigahertz. So giga is billion. So they can do 2 billion cycles, compute cycles per second. And a cycle is kind of what it sounds like a simple operation like moving a variable or deleting a variable or something like that. So the quantum computers that are around today can do 50 cycles per second, 1,000 cycles per second, that kind of speed. So they're very slow. And when it comes time to things like different parts of quantum computing, like, I don't know, decoherence and other things like that, they're also similarly slow and similarly imperfect. They have very low fidelity. So there's no part of a quantum computer that's better than a classical computer, and most people will agree that they never will be. The real reason anybody ever says that a quantum computer is fast has to do with this very esoteric concept in complexity. Complexity is something 99% of people will never study. Complexity is the study of algorithms, and it's a study specifically of algorithmic speed. And complexity is a weird thing, but there's really only 2 things you have to know in complexity. An algorithm can be exponential, or it can be polynomial. Exponential bad, polynomial good. So if you have an algorithm for sorting, or some other, routine computer job, it's almost always polynomial. But there are some algorithms that are unfortunately exponential. For example, factoring a very big number is really frustrating, and that's why we base our security on it. A problem called the discrete log problem is also extremely hard to do. These are exponential problems. The more bits you put into the problem, it gets exponentially harder to do. So with enough bits, it's basically impossible to do. And that's why we have encryption. Without that, encryption wouldn't work. So it turns out that there is, despite the extremely slow speed of quantum computers, there is one algorithm that can turn that problem that is exponential for every other computer, x86, RISC, ARM, Nvidia, doesn't matter, any classical computer, it can turn that exponential function into a polynomial function. And that's a really big deal. And if you're a nerd and you study these things, it's the coolest thing in the world, because if you think about something like integer factorization, and I'm going to greatly simplify this. The Bitcoin keys, for example, they don't use integer factorization. They use a similar system called discrete log problem. But a Bitcoin key is 256 bits. Well, 2 to the 256th is a gigantic number, and it's impossible for a regular old computer to compute. But if you make it polynomial, where it's, say, 3x, and x is 256, well, 3 times x is way easier to compute than 2 to the x. So it's pretty easy to understand. 2 to the x can be a very big number depending what x is. 3 times x is pretty much always going to be a small number. And that's why polynomial time algorithms are really great to have. And for some problems, we don't have them. So in fact, some problems are even harder than that, harder than exponential. So in any event, there is one problem where quantum computers can turn them can turn that algorithm from exponential time to polynomial time. And that's called Shor's algorithm. Shor invented this around 30 years ago. And what's interesting is the only time anybody said, I want to make a quantum computer and I'm going to work on this, was after Peter Shor's discovery. There was no other reason to want to make a quantum computer. Imagine recreating the transistor with something else, like an atom. At some point, you know, we've done so much work on transistors, we got them so fast, so error correcting, it would be kind of stupid to want to do it, because there's not many things we need to compute. You know, what's there left to compute in the world? The only thing that we really need compute for these days, at least heavy scale, is AI. And we can get to that in a second. But AI's problem is gigantic amounts of data, which quantum doesn't even attempt to solve. And in fact, quantum would make it worse. You know, after Shor's discovery, IBM in particular, they are a bit closer than when they started, but not much closer. Integer factorization is a pretty trivial in some ways problem because it doesn't have any real world impact. RSA, of course, Rivest, Shamir-Edelman, their algorithm for public key encryption via semi-primes is a very, you know, widely used thing. But, you know, we can always prepare to move off of that algorithm to another algorithm and avoid quantum, you know, kind of quantum threats quite easily. So cracking integer factorization is really kind of trivial in terms of like a goal. So there's not really a whole lot to quantum other than Shor's. And the reason I say this is because I want you to think about complexity again. Complexity is the key to all of this. If you cannot change the class of the algorithm from exponential to polynomial, there's no point in even bothering to change the computer you have. If you have an algorithm that is slow or is taking a lot of time to work, well, the best thing to do is look at the bottlenecks. And Amdahl's law is another interesting thing to study. Amdahl's law talks about where bottlenecks can be alleviated in computing problems and how much speed up you can expect when you do alleviate a bottleneck. Often there are multiple bottlenecks. In the case of AI, you know, there's a gigantic amount of data that has to be moved from disk to VRAM to the processor and back. And this is like a very intricate orchestra that has to occur. But one of the funny things about quantum is there is no disk and there is no RAM. The only thing you could do is prepare a circuit. So you construct the circuit and you can't change the circuit while it's running. You press go and that's it. And it takes a long time to prepare that circuit. A bunch of lasers have to do their thing. A bunch of things have to happen. So it's a very, 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 very slow process. The real advantage of quantum, if you talk about it with anybody in the industry, is again, you can go from 2 to the 256th to, which is, you know, about 10 to the 77th. So a number with 77 digits roughly. And again, it bears repeating that the cycle time or the clock speed of a quantum computer is anywhere between 7 to 10 attitude slower, an Nvidia computer or something like that. And that's slower. And by the way, that's per core. There's only one core on a quantum computer, so to speak. Whereas, you know, Intel and AMD processors ship with 16 to 32 cores, and A100s and H100s have thousands of cores, tens of thousands of cores, in fact. You know, there is no match, you know, for the current computers we have, and quantum computers are not anywhere close to as fast on basic operations. The trick really lies in this super special operation you can do where you can really shift the problem to something that's really easy for a quantum computer to do. It's almost like a tortoise and a hare, and the hare goes around this crazy, wild, circuitous track, but he's going, you know, 30 miles an hour because he's a fast little hare. And the quantum chip is more like a half a mile an hour or less tortoise, but the tortoise only has to go 5 steps. So tortoise is actually going to beat the hare in that case. You just don't gain any speed up. You basically have this really slow tortoise. That's the quantum computer. Here's the hare. That's the Nvidia. This is a rabbit. And the hare looks at the start line And he thinks that the course looks like this. It twists and twists for billions of turns to get to the finish line. And this goes on for infinity, and here's the finish line of the course. But the quantum turtle is much slower. Like I said, only 10,000 hertz. But the quantum turtle can see the much shorter path because he has quantum powers. So he can do the race like this. Race is over. Even though he's much, much slower, he's going to do like really slow, 10,000 hertz. Whereas this guy's going to go as fast as he can, but he's going in circles. He doesn't have a good algorithm. He's going to just keep going in circles. He's much faster. He's got parallelization. He's got lots of cores, but he's just going to keep going in circles, and he's not going to find the answer for billions of years. But the hare knows how to do it right away. The tortoise knows how to do it right away. It's a really incredible difference. But there's the only problem where you get the speed up is Shor's. You don't get the speed up for pharma. You don't get the speed up for any other algorithm that's like this. This miracle speed up is only when you need to divide a really big number in two. That's the only time you get the miracle tortoise beating the hare. One time, one place. You don't get it for AI, you don't get it for anything else. So you guys, I hear a lot of hopium and one day we'll have this or that, but you're failing to understand is that Shor's is a theoretical construct, right? He did Shor's on pen and paper. Peter Shor, 30 years ago, he sat down and said, if we had a machine that acted in like a quantum machine, this could happen. This miracle could happen. Nobody's come up with another algorithm. Most people think it ain't coming anytime soon. It would take such a leap of genius to exploit quantum features, quantum nature, to actually find another one of these, like traveling salesman. There's no complexity speed up with a quantum computer for traveling salesman. It's not clear that you're going to do that any faster either. It's not a matter of we haven't figured it out yet. It's a matter of doesn't exist. Most of these tracks are more like the tracks you and I know, which is they're just a big circle or just a marathon or something. And that special track doesn't come up very often. In fact, it's so rare in computing, I would argue that it's less than 1% of all compute use cases, maybe even less than 1% of 1% of compute cases. So anytime somebody says quantum computers can do things faster than regular computers, tell them they're a liar. Ask them how, where, for what, and we'll trot out things like pharmaceuticals. Oh, well, this is my subject. I'm the pharma bro. In pharma, the algorithms that we have for determining, let's say, if a drug can be attracted to, say, a protein, those algorithms have pretty normal complexity. They're polynomial time complexity. They're just going through a list and doing a calculation against a fixed set of variables, and you just have to go through them one by one. Quantum will not make that faster. There's no special sauce in algorithmic time that is going to shift the complexity from one to another. And advances in compute speed, Moore's law hasn't gone away, and advances in algorithmic approaches, for example, machine learning, this whole thing we call AI, these things make these algorithms easier. So, I hesitate, to even say that there's a single valuable application of quantum computing. And that's something that, is sobering if you're in the quantum computing industry. And many people in the quantum computing industry acknowledge this. A good example is Chris Monroe, who started what is kind of the largest independent quantum computing company called IonQ. And even he bemoans the idea that, we need applications. There's really no obvious space where quantum computing can succeed. Otherwise, look, I just call it like I see it. I don't care about, agendas or anything like that. And in many ways, I love quantum computing. It's one of the most fascinating scientific endeavors man can undertake. But ultimately, and actually, I would love to undertake it. I'd love to see quantum computers work. But without the complexity shift, there's sort of no point. Again, why use a 10 kilohertz processor when you can use 20,000 2 gigahertz processors with a Nvidia GPU? It's kind of crazy. The only way that little slowpoke could beat the Nvidia machine, and I'm talking about a computer that's $10,000. It's not, you know, a fortune. One Nvidia A100 is $10,000. It's not like some massively expensive thing. Why in the world would you ever use a computer that's literally millions of times slower? Well, the only way you could do it is if you found this super cool, fast way to do things. And quantum has that property, but unfortunately it only has that property for Shors. So we need to wait and find a new algorithm. Now, some people say, well, we'll get a new algorithm. We don't know what it's useful for yet. Ordinarily, I'd like that. But as an investor, praying and hoping for a scientific breakthrough, that's not really investing. If you think one is around the corner, then God bless you. You know, that's a really good insight. But I don't know. There could be one that gets published tomorrow, but there could also be one that's published 20 years from now. We don't really have the luxury of waiting and guessing if one will ever happen. It may never happen. Or there could be 20 of these in the next 5 years. We just don't know. But what's funny is we actually do have working quantum computers now at very, very, very small scales. And that doesn't seem to have accelerated any dramatic improvements. You know, for example, the classic NP hard problems like traveling salesman, there's not real algorithmic speedups there. So it's a very, very difficult thing to sort of find true utility for quantum computers, as exciting as it would be. I mean, I'd love to see it. The one thing I'll say about NP hard problems is we have good approximations for many of them. And, you know, this was why Jensen was very skeptical when he hosted quantum computing companies, and he said, why do I need to approximate traveling salesman any better than I already can? And he sort of talked about, well, if Uber can save a second on every route they have, you know, is that really worth it? You know, because our approximations are good enough. And I think that was an interesting way to, you know, probably not the perfect way to make the point, but like a pretty good way to make this general point that which NP hard problem do you think that we have poor approximations, such poor approximations for? And, you know, again, the traveling salesman is pretty funny. There's a guy in my office who, whenever anybody brings up traveling salesman, he flips a gasket because he's a computer scientist, and he says, you know, there is no quantum speedup for traveling salesman. And it's a funny thing, but I do think someday, you know, we'll learn to continue to exploit, you know, the features of physics and nature to compute faster and faster. And I look forward to that. But we have not gone off of the transistor standard ever. And it is a remarkable thing that it sounds like at some point, maybe it's 30 years from now, we will actually factor numbers with quantum computers. But nobody really cares about factoring right now. And in fact, the mathematical literature for factoring is very dry. If you're in math right now, there's hotter fields like category theory or basically anything other than factoring. There's just a handful of people that care about factoring and cryptography, especially old school number theory cryptography, or at least I should say, you know, DLP or IFP number theory. You know, obviously post-quantum number theory is interesting, and there's plenty of other subjects in number theory that are fascinating. But in general, you know, this is largely a dead field. And so I would love to see an area that quantum could do something interesting, you know, outside of number factoring, and number factoring isn't that interesting in the first place.
Do you have an event or a moment in mind that will occur at some point and will get the industry to realize that, okay, it was a dead attempt, it didn't work, like quantum doesn't have all the bells and whistles that we were hoping it has?
It depends on what you're talking about. So in the case of Google and IBM and companies like that, they already think that.
Sure.
You know, they know that there's no magic genie that's going to get unlocked after they make a fault tolerant quantum computer. I think that in a lot of ways they have this thesis that, one, it's the coolest thing in the world to do if you're a scientist, and that is true.
True. And
you can attract lots of smart people that are really talented to come to your company and work on like the coolest project ever. So, you know, for example, IBM, Microsoft, I should say, spends around $300 million. This was leaked by the journal. They spend around $300 million a year in quantum. And what's interesting is they get to time those expenses. So like there is this weird dynamic, and I think Facebook does this too, where if they want to beat earnings, they can slow their quantum spend, and they can actually kind of like modulate by 5 or 10 million, which is a penny a share for them, exactly how much earnings they have. So quantum is this like kind of useful, almost like time sink. It's almost like
balance sheet,
philanthropy.
Little trickery. I get you.
Yeah, well, Microsoft has been well known to do this. They used to do this on the revenue side as well, and it's called earnings smoothing. So the more regular your earnings are, the more exciting it is. I think they've largely stopped doing this, but they got in trouble for this like 20 years ago. But in any event, the quantum experiments at Microsoft for $300 million a year, you know, Microsoft wants to feel like Bell Labs. Everyone wants to be like Bell Labs. Bell Labs was lightning in a bottle. It'll never happen again. You know, that was a once in a millennium thing, how special Bell Labs was, how it invented most of modern technology in one little corner of AT&T. And everyone would love to have that, Google, Microsoft, etc. And if you're going to set up a Bell Labs, what do you work on? Well, quantum computing, memristors, room temperature semiconductors, magic angle stuff. Like there's only so much future technology to spend time on, and quantum is kind of a natural thing to work on. So I think every one of these companies just makes so much money that they sort of want to have a Bell Labs. Facebook spends $15 or $20 billion a year on AR and VR, including fundamental research on human computing interfaces. So I think a lot of companies have their pet projects. Quantum is a pet project. I think IBM believes there's something there, but the question again is what? In terms of the smaller companies, almost every one of these companies was going to go bankrupt. You know, it was quantum winter, nuclear winter, because there was promise for quantum computing, gate-based quantum computing at least, and then the venture capital world said, it doesn't feel like this is going any faster. We have 5 or 10 qubits. You know, we're not going anywhere, and venture stopped investing. After Willow, you know, we now are back in quantum spring, and unfortunately, we're still at low fidelity and low qubit counts. So even running Shors, which, you know, is the only known quantum super speed up, even running Shors is kind of like, quite frankly, could be at least, you know, 10 years away, but it could be as much as 30 years away, because there's just not a great plan for getting to, you know, a really great, large, fault-tolerant computer. And you still have to ask yourself, to what end? What am I going for here? Do I really want to factor a 600-digit number? Why? Who cares? And of course, if you're trying to hack some Bitcoin or hack somebody's password, you know, you do care. But you know, the internet infrastructure people pay attention to this. Bitcoin people pay attention to this. And right now, if you go on one of these cloud quantum computers, the best number you can factor is a 5-digit number. So we're pretty safe for now. And remember, each digit is 10x harder. So as you add a digit, to go from 10 to the 33rd to 10 to the 34th is 10 times harder. So you have to get all the way to 10 to the 77th. So right now, my IBM computer, quantum computer, which again, I encourage you to go to quantum.ibm.com. They give you 10 minutes every month to run for free on their very expensive quantum computers. There's not a long line to run them, I can tell you. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to do this. But go ahead and do it and see if you can get it to factor a number. Unfortunately, you will not be able to factor a number using something called a fully implemented quantum Shor's algorithm. You have to do a half classical, half quantum, because right now quantum computers can't even handle full Shor's. So you kind of have to give it a little assistance. And even with that, the quantum computer can only factor a 5-digit number. So we have 70 orders of magnitude to go, 72 orders of magnitude. Now, of course, many orders of magnitude will be done in single leaps, right? If you improve fidelity a little bit, you might get 5 orders of magnitude. If you improve gate speed a little bit, you can get another 5 orders. If you improve fault tolerance, you might get 40 orders of magnitude. So, you know, it's not like it'll never happen, and I'm excited for the day it's going to happen. In fact, I want to be the first person to be on it when it happens, perhaps for obvious reasons. So I watch this place closely because I want all your Bitcoin. You know, ultimately it's fine to sort of, you know, get Shors, but what else are we going to ever do? What compute problems do we really have? many of you guys know, my girlfriend works at OpenAI, and she has a very, very, very expensive and large compute cluster. We saw from Grok the other day that they also have a very, 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 very large compute cluster. And but what are these guys doing with all these computers? Why are people sending Nvidia, $50 billion a year for computers? Well, it certainly has nothing to do with quantum. In these computers, ultimately, think of like two very, very large data sets. In fact, the processing is a little almost less important than bandwidth. So you download the whole internet. You download more than the whole internet even. You download multiple snapshots of the whole internet over and over again. You sort them. And you say, okay, I have to train a neural network. Well, first you have to manage all that data somewhere. It has to go on disk, most likely. And then eventually, somewhere, somehow, it has to go to RAM. And then from there, it has to go to VRAM. And then in VRAM, the computer, an Nvidia machine, will calculate in parallel with all these very, very fast parallel cores, will calculate how to update weights and biases of a neural network. And this would be a very large, deep neural network with many layers and many neurons and many parameters. So it's a very, very large model. And layer by layer and epoch by epoch and learning rate by learning rate, these weights and biases will be very subtly adjusted. And after the first, I think an H100 can hold 600, around 600 gigabytes, 8 times 8, 640 gigabytes of VRAM. H200 can hold, I think, double that. And so basically, you load up that VRAM, you do the calculations, you evacuate the VRAM, you load it up again. And you have a lot of data, so you have to do this multiple times across multiple machines. It's a very complex structure, and ultimately those weights and biases will slightly get updated. Shout out to the actual company called Weights and Biases, acquired by CoreWeave, successful deal for them. And so a lot of a lot of AI actually evolves around storage and transportation of that data to the processor. This is something, unfortunately, that quantum can't do at all. There's no storage in quantum. In fact, the amount of bits we have, even if we had 1,000 qubits, that's the storage. It's 1,000 bits. It's not very much. I don't think we're going to ever get, 800 quantum gigabits, I guess, or you have to multiply by 8 of storage. We're struggling to even get 1 million qubits. So getting 600 or 700 gigaqubits is like, doesn't seem like it'll ever happen. And again, quantum RAM and how fast that can perform is also going to be really important. We spend a lot of time, Micron spends a lot of time thinking about how to get RAM faster and faster, and you have to start from scratch with quantum. And it's not going to be easy or fun to sort of scale that over the next 30 years. And then to what end? None of these algorithms, matrix multiplication, go any faster on a quantum computer. They're the same thing.
I think you nailed it on the head when saying that like Shor's algorithm is the best hope. It adds problems to the world and doesn't really add solutions to much legal and ethical stuff. Like it adds the need that you describe of cybersecurity experts putting a lot of effort into protecting, various websites and services against that. Does that sound fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think Shor's is, to me, I'm a amateur number theorist, very, very amateur. Definitely, needless to say, extremely amateur. But I love quantum computing and I love number theory. There's really no advantage from quantum algorithms on any other field of math. And if you can find one, you'll be remembered for the rest of history, right? This isn't a small thing. If you can find answers to NP hard problems by speeding them up with quantum computers, there's this idea in computing that you'll actually solve every NP hard problem. So this is a real big issue, because if you could solve every NP hard problem, well, now you're talking about not just being remembered for all of history, but being celebrated as maybe one of the greatest geniuses ever. So I think we're really not understanding quantum computing at all, and it's just something where kind of the simplest explanation is people get really excited. They think they see a headline that says faster than Nvidia or like, something like that. And this quantum computer could do a calculation that would have taken 100 zillion years to do on a regular computer. Well, yes, but that's just Shor's algorithm. That's just some contrived thing that only applies to one thing. It would be amazing for my friends at XAI or my friends at Microsoft or Meta. They would love to have one computer that they can press a button and all their training is done. That would be amazing. They wouldn't have to spend $100 billion. But that's a lie. It's fake. There's no such thing. There won't even be such thing in 30 years. There's no bandwidth. There's no RAM bandwidth. There's no hard disk bandwidth. There's no way to actually do this. And anybody that studies computers, trust me, I am not a computer expert. I'm an amateur programmer. In my own software company, I don't even write production code. So it does not take a computer genius to see this. It just takes a couple of basic, principles. I would fail anyone's complexity class today, but I can get through the first chapter of a book about complexity, and I think you can too. And again, don't trust the headline of that there is some amazing advantage to these machines, because there is none. And again, on quantum.ibm.com or on AWS Bracket, you can try the Rigetti and IonQ boxes on Bracket. You can try the IBM boxes on their thing. Go ahead and write a program. Ask GPT or now Grok 4. Which seems to be better. I am sure Grok 4 can write you the code that you need for a quantum computer. Just go and say, Grok 4, write Shor's algorithm for me. Help me factor the best number you can. And you will laugh when you see the result.
That's the problem, right? It's like, this is the only problem you are going to be able to get from Grok to generate. It's like
and it doesn't work. it doesn't even work right now. You could factor I don't know, 32,000 or something like that. But what's ironic about that is it's not actually even fully Shor's. For full Shor's, you have to do a lot of really difficult to implement problems that quantum computers are too small to do. They're like many hundreds of thousands of gates, and these computers can't handle them.
Where in the wave of that second bubble are we? Does it go down from here?
The question is what event or what thing will take place that'll wake people up? And again, from the company side, the companies have all kinds of different utility functions. The companies, for example, they want to either promote themselves, and some companies want to do cool science, but investors are different, right? Investors want to make money. And in times like this, investors go out in the Kaplan curve as hard as they can to find the highest risk return. So, when there was a recession, the last recession we had, you could have bought any blue chip stock in the stock market for 10 times earnings because things were really bad. You could have gone to Goldman Sachs, this is what Warren Buffett did, or Bank of America, and actually gotten warrants out of Goldman or Bank of America, which is crazy, right? Only people giving warrants out are microcaps. It was an amazing time to be able to buy stocks, but the Kaplan curve shrinks, the frontier curve shrinks in that scenario. So right now, the Kaplan curve is so extended that Fartcoin is worth $1 billion. People are trading 0 DTEs, so even stuff like quantum went from, the Willow announcement wasn't so much some kind of success for Google or quantum. It was more of a wake-up call for, here's another thing that we can shove to the frontier of the Kaplan curve. Whether it's things like Joby, stuff, anything that's super speculative, Oklo, nuclear, anything that's just so wild that you can invest in it and get a high risk, high return. Remember, return and risk tend to be symmetric on the Kaplan curve. So the investor in the bull market doesn't ask what has good fundamentals, what has good, is a good long-term investment. They ask, what is the riskiest thing in the world I can buy, because that's going to go up the most. And that makes sense in this environment. You don't want to buy Merck, you don't want to buy Pfizer. These stocks are like watching paint dry. You want to buy stuff that's exciting. So this stuff is exciting and it's going up. Ultimately, whether it's a lack of earnings or something like that, it's either going to be alpha that takes the stocks down or beta that takes the stocks down.
Thank you, Martin.
See you guys later.